Good morning, this is Nicole Ringgold. Today I'm going to show you how to make these raindrop earrings. You'll need gauge 24 sterling silver sheet as well as round wire both in 20 gauge and 16 gauge. This was one of the first designs I created back in 2013. As I said, you'll use 24 gauge sheet. This is dead soft. I'm going to use my disc cutter, and if you don't have one of these, unfortunately, you will need to saw out your circle. This is Swanstrom brand, and I'm going to be using the largest hole. The largest hole on this disc cutter is 1 1/4 inch. On the opposite side of the disc that you're going to be cutting out, you might want to place a flange. The flange prevents your circle, your disc, from being lopsided when you punch it out. Be sure that your disc is sharp side pointing downward. I've had a lot of people place it in the disc cutter upside down, which unfortunately damages the disc cutter. You'll want to use shears or a saw to cut that disc in half so that you have 2 perfect halves. And then I'm going to mark a grid, and at each cross section is where you will drill a hole. Note that I did anneal my silver beforehand so that my drill bit does not become dull when I drill through the silver. If you are unfamiliar with annealing, you can either wait until I show you that coming up or visit one of my previous videos where I show that in detail. The ball rivets that I'm going to be putting through these holes is 20 gauge, so I'm actually going to use a drill bit that fits 18 gauge wire, so that there's room for them to wiggle around, be a little bit articulated. This chart shows the range of drill bit sizes that you can use for 18 gauge wire. In the meantime, I'm taking 2 sections of 16 gauge wire and I'm going to fold them and bend them around a ring mandrel. I wrap the 16 gauge wire one at a time around the ring mandrel, pinch it shut with my fingers, and use a nylon mallet to hammer it so that it holds its position or holds its shape. This is half hard round wire so that it does more easily hold its shape. I will be annealing the wire before I solder it to the sheet, but for the time being while forming, I prefer for it to be half hard. Once I'm finished forming the round wire, I will make sure that it fits up against the half discs that I cut out. I want them to be pretty darn snug around the bottom. If the fit isn't quite perfect, you can manipulate them with your fingers. If you're finding the wires hard to manipulate with your fingers, then at this point you might want to anneal it. To do so, I use a Little Smith oxygen propane torch. And the soft flame, which means more propane, you can see it's a soft flame. I'm going across my sterling silver round wire, and I'm also going to anneal the sheet. That ensures, 1, that it's soft, 2, that it's clean, and your soldering job is going to be a lot easier. If you're struggling to understand the annealing flame, then you can visit my full-length tutorial on how to use the Little Smith torch. No matter when you pull away from your silver, you're going to want it to be dark, at least the first couple or few times that you've annealed your silver before you've done any depletion gilding. From here, I'm going to use easy solder. I'm going to flux the wire. I use Mighty Flux from Rio Grande, which is the same thing as Prips. Actually, it's not the same thing, but it's really close. And then I'm going to sweat the easy solder to the wire. Remember, heat the solder, not your pick. And if it takes you a long time and you're heating your platform, then the solder is going to say, oh, I like your platform, so it's going to swipe across the surface and just create a smudge. Remember, solder follows heat. In which case, move the solder to a cooler portion of your platform. And also make sure that your pick is clean. Now you take the wire with solder, sweat solder to it, and place it around your half circles. The wire should not fall underneath or be on top. It should be on the outside of your half circles. Flux your entire piece. I flux everything my torch touches. That's a funny angle. It looks like my arm is coming from a different direction, but I'm actually reaching around the camera. Anyway, then you're going to heat the mass, which means heat the sheet. And I use my pick to ensure that in case there's any movement in the metal, I can nudge the silver inward toward the wire, make sure that they're nice and flush. Heat the mass until the silver that's on the wire says, oh, It's hotter over there, and I want to go toward the heat, and it will then flow between the wire and the sheet. Once it flows, you pickle and then rinse off your pickle in water. And then you'll take the longer of the two wires, if there is one, otherwise, whichever, doesn't matter, and you're going to create a lollipop top. This technique I cover in my barbell chain tutorial further down in this YouTube channel. In this loop, this link is going to be fused, not soldered. So even though it does not have to be 100% flush, it does need to be nice and secure and touching. In other words, when you create the lollipop top or the loop at the top of your wire, be sure that it is just like that. There's no gap in between the tip of the wire and the bend in the wire. And then you can use needle nose pliers or flat nose pliers to ensure that the loop is on the same plane so that when you put it down on your work surface, it lays flat. Just like in the barbell tutorial that's shown previously, you're going to heat the mass, which is the long section leading down into the base of the earring. That's the vulnerable tip, so you're going to avoid that. So here I'm heating the mass, and I've got my pick at 1 o'clock, nudging that in so that when it's ready to fuse, when both sides have reached the same temperature at the same time, they're ready to fuse. They need to be touching. So keep in mind, this is the mass. Put your pick at about 1 o'clock. That's your vulnerable spot that you want to fuse. So I'm heating my mass, using my pick at 1 o'clock. When they reach the same temperature, they'll fuse. Now I'm squeezing them together, and I'm going to flush cut the extra wire to ensure that it is a flush connection, because this seam is going to be soldered. I'm going to use medium solder because the ear wires will be attached with easy solder. I prefer to use wire solder, but any kind of medium solder really does just fine, and just 2 tiny pieces. Once again, I'm going to pick solder, so flux that connection, and then make sure that your pick is clean. Heat your solder, not the pick. Make sure that you're not taking too long to pick up that solder so that the platform doesn't get too hot. And then you're going to heat the entire piece, transfer the pick to one side of the wire and draw it over with the heat of your torch. Again, heat your solder, not your pick. Make sure it's fluxed. Put it on one side and draw it over with the heat of your torch. Now I'm going to snip pieces of 20 gauge wire into approximately 1/2 inch lengths, maybe just a tiny bit longer than that, but really not much longer than that. And then I will hold them with a pair of tweezers in the air and heat from below, balling up one end of every single piece of wire. You're welcome to use fine silver if you prefer for this part of the process, but I'm using sterling. And if you end up with little air pockets or pits in your balls, don't worry about that. I'll show you how to even out and smooth out the balls later on. Place the pins through the holes, and you can fill every single one of the holes. And then if you have a good third hand, place your piece in the third hand with the pins, with the balls up and the pins facing down. You'll want to have a nice hot flame so that you can go beneath your piece and heat all of the pins until they ball up. If you don't have a third hand, you can place the piece between 2 soldering bricks. As long as you can heat from below, that's all that really matters. As I'm torching the pins underneath, you might notice the angle of my torch. I'm not pointing directly upward at the metal, I'm pointing across. That ensures that the pins, when they ball up, do not fuse to the bottom of the sheet. It ensures that they stay articulated or kinetic. This might sound like dirty language, but if your balls are dangling a little too low, you might want to turn up your torch and then hit them with that hotter flame, in which case they'll pull upward and they'll be tighter against the silver. Then to smooth out the balls on the top, if you have any air pockets in them or pits, turn up your torch once again. Make sure it's nice and hot. And then you'll take your torch and go across the surface of the upper balls and just across the surface. Don't point downward at your metal, point across, and that will smooth out the metal or smooth out the top of the balls. Then from here, I will take more 20 gauge wire, and I'm going to create a lollipop top at one end of each of these to create my ear wire loops. And these are going to be soldered with easy solder. You'll feed the ear wires through the little loops at the top of your water droplets or your raindrops. Make sure you've got them nice and flush. Since they're going to be soldered, you do want them to not just be touching, but you want them to be flush. Pinch them together, place them down on your work surface, and ensure that the ear wire, wherever you're going to solder, is pulled as far away from the previous solder joint as possible. Again, I'm going to be using easy solder. So flux your piece. I've got 2 tiny bits of easy solder on my work surface. I've got 2 tiny, tiny pieces of easy solder, pick soldering, and just like previously, I'm heating one side to draw the solder over and into that seam. From here, I pickle, then I rinse them off, do liver of sulfur, I polish with sunburst radial discs, and there you have it. Reach out if you have questions, comments, and I hope you enjoyed.